Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, we have Britney Muller, founder of DataSci 101. Britney is an international keynote speaker, writer, and SEO consultant. She's passionate about original research, machine learning, and automating workflows. Today, she's founded her own company, DataSci 101, where she strives to make machine learning and AI accessible for all marketers. Today, we're going to delve into large language models, generative AI, world-class content, and a whole bunch of other fun things. How are you doing, Britney?
I'm doing good. How are you, Danny?
Good. I'm doing really well. So we bumped into each other at Brighton SEO a couple months ago. I got to hear you speak, and I've been following you for a while. So it's really a big honor to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited that we're able to do this.
So let's first talk about, where did you go to school and what did you study?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Minnesota, and I actually started out pre-med. And then after about a year, decided to make the switch to the School of Journalism, where I studied strategic communications, public relations.
Awesome. And that doesn't surprise me that Britney liked pre-med, right?
I loved it. Yeah.
What caused you to make that switch?
You know, what's funny is it was a lot of persuasion from my family.
Ooh.
So I think they kind of saw very early on that I was looking towards a career, as they put it, like in a basement somewhere, like tucked away in a lab, which quite frankly, I know I would have loved it. So there's nothing like against that there, but they saw these other interests and passion of mine, particularly around marketing and writing. I've always been a writer. And so they kind of pushed me to explore something in the School of Journalism. And yeah, very happy that they did.
So when you look back at your time at the University of Minnesota, are there any experiences both inside and outside of the classroom that you feel were impactful in directing your path and where you are today?
You know, what's funny is I feel that I learned more outside of the classroom than I did in, particularly in my career path. I was just scrappy because I had to be, as a college student. I remember desperately wanting a yoga membership at was like the popular hot yoga place. I couldn't afford it. And so I invented a job where I would be their social media manager and I would do all these like marketing things for them, and they let me do it and I got free yoga. And similarly, I walked into a couple other companies and was like, hey, I pitched to do this thing. Here's how I'm going to do it. So I think it just gave me a lay of the land as far as like working with people and interacting with people. I think waitressing was also a huge part of that. Like I very quickly learned how to navigate different kinds of people, how to read people, how to react to different negative situations. And all of that has sort of prepared me for the career I have today.
So going up to someone and like kind of bartering,
yeah.
Or even, being a waitress, where do you think that comes from? Like, is it just you, your personality, or were there certain things that your parents, or like when you were younger, was there something that instilled that like in you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Danny, that's such a good question. And I actually have thought a bit about that. And I think there's some like parental Minnesota culture baked in there. Like, first of all, Minnesotans are just like good, traditionally good people, but we also have this like probably unhealthy amount of like wanting people to like us, right? Like it's like baked into our DNA. Like we really want people to think we're good people and, like us. And so I think very early on, I identified that in adults around me and I navigated that as like a child. And so coming up into like having my first waitressing job, some of that came more naturally to me than maybe it might others.
No, that's so fascinating.
Isn't that crazy?
It'd be cool if we should do it. It would be cool to do a little study, right?
Yeah.
Just Minnesotans in general, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So let's dive into mentorship. So how would you define a mentor?
So I have a pretty possibly unique way of identifying mentors, and that's less in the formal sense of you ask someone to be your mentor and they, provide you with support and feedback. Over time, I have really learned to value just relationships in general that might look a little bit like mentorships, but they're at its core, they're friendships, right? There's a two-way interaction there that is mutually beneficial, mutually supportive. And, oftentimes one person has just more natural insight into a particular thing that you might be wanting to accomplish or do. And that's where some of that like more mentorship conversation come about, I guess.
Yeah. And I think in our industry in general, having colleagues and just having peers, it's an environment where, yeah, I'm not saying everyone's good, but there's a lot of good people, a lot of people
Yeah.
who want to connect and
Right.
offer. So I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but I feel like
Yeah.
specifically in digital marketing, it's a lot easier to have like those mentor slash friends slash colleagues.
When I was younger and even just out of college, you have a lot of advantages as far as like trying to connect with people digitally, right? Reaching out to people and doing it in a way that communicates value. It communicates that you're maybe scrappy and bringing different things to the table. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's way more opportunities available to people for people to connect with others they feel like might be outside their reach. And oftentimes we just don't even try, right? So I think to like give yourself the grace of just trying to connect with some of those people that like maybe you admire, you follow, and doing it in a way that's not, at least in my opinion, that's not, just, hey, will you be my mentor? It's more of like a value-driven conversation. Maybe, hey, I looked at all of Danny, your incredible podcasts for this last, quarter, and I automatically transcribed them all and did the, bring value that's interesting and that can kind of like plant the seed of that relationship.
Yeah, I love that. So let's dig into some of your most influential mentors. I know some of them are like rock stars. I don't know all of them, but let's talk about them and how they influenced you.
I feel like I stand on the shoulders of giants. Like they've influenced me immensely. It's starting like very early on where I connected with a local realtor in Breckenridge, Colorado, who really took me under his wing. And he was so sweet. He would drop me off at these like huge houses in Breck and leave me there for the afternoon. I'd bring a lunch and I would just get to like be in the house and write the listing. And that was really cool, like trying to incorporate, the Breckenridge culture that I'd come to like love and know so well into an actual like mini side job for me. Was so fun. And along the way, he was very kind of action oriented and supporting the growth of my career. And he picked up very early on how uncomfortable I was talking about money. I mean, I would melt. I felt like dying, right? Like again, this is some like Midwest roots there of like, you don't talk about that. It's inappropriate, blah, blah, blah. And he really gave me kind of the space and made it comfortable for me to like just start to learn the ropes a bit when it comes to doing freelance work, like writing and different things. So that was monumental for me. And also, he paid for my first SEO class and I still have those notes in a frame. They're in storage, but it's so funny. It's bold keywords, it's all this stuff. So he was absolutely influential. And that was Pete Deininger. That's his name. But yeah, he's still out in Breckenridge. And then after Pete, I connected with Rich Stats in Vail, Colorado, who, oh my gosh, I love so much. I consider Rich family. He is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my whole life. And he's always thinking 12 steps ahead of everyone else. And he has some of the coolest and most powerful marketing ideas I've ever come across. And so working with him was like, I don't know, it was so much fun. It made this space so much fun. He introduced me to Whiteboard Friday. He gave me the confidence. So like that kind of support is so important as you're identifying your skills and learning the craft and getting comfortable with what you're good at, and equally important, what you're not good at. So yeah, also hugely influential.
And you know what? I think I'm not saying you take it for granted, but I think sometimes people do take it for granted because sometimes you end up in like a bad agency, right?
Yeah.
Or a horrible situation.
Yeah.
And I think for what you're saying is look at the difference. Like a horrible situation can really stunt your growth,
Yeah.
change these opportunities, but a good opportunity could turn you into a Brittany Muller,
Yeah.
right? Which is pretty awesome.
And that's all it takes, right? Is like one or two of those, and that changes everything. But you're exactly right. There are obviously like the neutral or the negative experiences out there, but if you're able to like encounter a positive one, and then I would also say like, and match that up with a bit of like action oriented effort. Like I do look back at my transition from working with Rich to going out on my own, and like I took a ton of risk, right? Like I remember I was late on my rent that month that I went to MozCon for the first time ever because I had to go. There was no other choice in my head. I was like, I knew all the speakers that were going, like I had followed them religiously. That was the next step for me, was like making those connections in person. I had questions for, specific people. I brought things for people. Like I was delusional. Like this was just like my world. And I was so excited to be a part of it.
So cool. So I guess that leads on to talk about MozCon. What about your relationship with Rand?
He's the best. I can't speak highly enough of Rand, honestly. And you know what? I've been thinking a lot about, and I think about this all the time, and I've been trying to craft in my head like a way to communicate this to him in a way that like doesn't freak him out, but like communicates the value that is there. But he's just like made me a better person, period. It's insane. I mean, I could list so many things, but it's just like, that man has taught me so much, way more than he even probably realizes, because I've been around him enough to see how he handles things, how he navigates different situations or, sticky meetings or this or that. It's just, he's one of a kind. Yeah.
And when you had a chance to work with him, was it like working with a celebrity, or did that wear off soon?
No, it definitely felt like I was working with a celebrity. It was crazy. I was pinching myself all the time. And I still remember like the first time I disagreed with him and how just like sick I felt. I was like, oh my God. But that's something that I also love and appreciate so much about Rand, is he really creates a safe space for disagreement, right? Like, and he's one of those like brilliant minds that values understanding other sides to the story and where different people are coming from. And so I very quickly kind of got over that. But yeah, he is, oh my gosh, he's a legend. He's just an absolute legend.
Let's talk a little bit about your parents. I know we mentioned a couple minutes ago, but I know you put them down as your mentors, but when you look at them, what do you feel like, what's the most that you've gained from them?
My mom is like the most thoughtful person on earth. Like she would do anything for anyone. So would my dad. Like they're just two of the kindest, beautiful people ever. And they're also like, they're so different. My mom's very like bubbly and outgoing, and she can be like loud and fiery. And my dad is more quiet, but like always knows just what to say. And I remember, I'll never forget, I was reading this book. I was taking my dad and my brother to Vegas for this work trip. This was like over 10 years ago. And I was reading a book that was describing cities in the US with one word descriptors. So I want to say like Las Vegas was sin, and LA was fame, and New York was success. And it was really cool. And I was talking to my dad about it, and I was like, what would your word be? And without any second thought, he was like, integrity. And that perfectly describes him, like 100%.
And that's a really, really important attribute to have.
Yeah.
So let's move over to how you mentor in your current position. I believe you do mentor a few young professionals regularly. Tell me about that.
Again, it's not like there's no formal mentorship, I would say, but I'm checking in with them. I'm also like volleying over opportunities when I see appropriate. So one young woman is actually in New Zealand, and there was a speaking opportunity in Australia that just didn't make sense for me anyways, but I immediately thought of her, right? And what a great step that was in this period of time for what she was doing, what she was interested in her education. And so things like that are my favorite things in the world. Like that's making those connections for people and making introductions. I think that's like a big thing that could be considered mentorship that maybe people don't think about as often. But some of the most influential mentors I've ever had, especially Rand, is so generous with his introductions. He'll bring your name up if it's relevant. Like he's just so thoughtful at connecting people. And so I try really hard to do that and do it in like meaningful, appropriate ways.
Yeah. And once again, you don't realize, like, I mean, it's amazing how you can change someone's life by doing that, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes people forget that by giving, you actually get more. So
Totally.
And that's not the reason why you do it, right? It's not. I'm not doing it because I want to feel good, but like it's one of the added benefits.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love that.
Let's jump into your areas of expertise. Let's first talk about large language models. Let's first define LLMs, or large language models.
Yep.
They are very large, deep learning models that are pre-trained on vast amounts of data. What are some common ways that we're currently using LLMs?
First of all, I feel as though most marketers are not even thinking about LLMs in the appropriate construct of what it is. So just to like break down what it is, there are two types of quote unquote AI. We haven't reached AI yet. There's no such thing. There probably won't be for a very long time or never, but whatever. That's what we're using now. So within these two types, there's generative. So things that create entirely new outputs like images and text, they're generative. And then there's deterministic. These are more of like your image labeling, your cancer identification. You know, these are more like spot on. You want these to be super, super accurate. Whereas the generative is just sort of, you know, kind of hallucinating at all times and making stuff up. That alone is super, super important to differentiate. Because what I see marketers doing is going to generative AI, like an LLM, for deterministic tasks. And that's not really what it's made for. It's important to not be fooled by LLMs. They are very clever and confident sounding, and they sound like they're super intelligent. And we need to keep in mind, these are word guessing machines. They are estimating their next word off of a giant probability distribution of everything they've seen over their training data. And while, again, this looks very convincing and very confident, it is not always the most reliable or accurate. It's not great with like industry specific insights. So there's different aspects like that. The thing that kills me is when people are using this for keyword research, right? This is like, word garbage. This is just, it's making stuff up. And while that's great, if that's what you want, if you don't want a data-driven strategy and you just want some content ideas, go use it. But if you're like a traditional SEO marketing background and you want to be really strategic in how you're targeting your content SEO wise, I would not use it for something like keyword research.
What about, let's say, you know, a process that a lot of SEOs will do is, you know, after they're done their keyword research, they'll like group keywords. And even in PPC, we group. Do you feel like using that tool to help group, would that be a good idea or still a bad idea?
I love the clustering models. I think they're brilliant. It allows you to see the forest from the trees, and it gives you like a bird's eye view of clusters of keywords and topics that go together. I think it's incredibly valuable. And now that I've been using it for the last several years, I hate just looking at a giant mess of a spreadsheet that isn't kind of organized like that. So yeah, that's a great, great example. But that's not generative, right? So that algorithm that's more of your traditional natural language processing models. So again, this is where people get confused as to what LLMs are capable of, which is something I, get excited about kind of educating and sharing the knowledge because, people that are doing their work day in and day out, like you're going to think of the next brilliant application for what you do. So it's important just to have like that foundational awareness of what is it good for, what's it not good for, fundamentally, how does it really work? And that information essentially teaches you how to fish moving forward.
So what are your predictions for the future of LLMs?
It's wild. So I don't know if you saw this, but I went to NeurIPS last month, which is like one of the number one AI conferences, 16,000 people. It's crazy. Like all the big teams are there. There's over 13 talks going on at once. It's an 8-day thing. It was hectic. What I was surprised by was the amount of disagreement between the people at the top of these things. And disagreement over like some very basic stuff. I was expecting to go to this conference, get all these like clear, definitive answers and, be better equipped to navigate 2024. And I'm left with more questions, some more concerns. It's wild. It's absolutely wild what's going on. And I mean, there were talks about LLM coercion between agents and how they can become manipulative. And there were examples of this. And then there's also, all this content around how LLMs aren't good at generalizing information, so it's all over the place. But my predictions revolve around, unfortunately, how industry trends are currently going. So what I see happening is the large tech companies that are in power of the largest LLMs, it's in their best interest to prioritize revenue, unfortunately. This back and forth competition, we can expect to see a lot more generative AI baked into the most common tools that we use and love. So I fully expect to see those integrations soon. Granted, it's going to be with, the large experimental warning to basically offload accountability for when these things go wrong. But I think we're going to see a massive rollout into possibly applications where it doesn't necessarily make the most sense, but they're just trying to see what sticks. I also see there's a really exciting area of startups that are focused on industry-specific LLMs. And those narrow applications, so with increased performance for, say, like marketing stuff, marketing tactics and strategy, those could do really, really, really well. And we might start to see more and more of those in some of the most highly regulated spaces. So think finance, think medical, law is another one. There's a lot of applications within those spaces to save time and resources and also get more accurate in certain cases with very fine-tuned domain-specific LLMs that are connected to a RAG-like model, right? They're basically connected to a database of accurate, relevant information.
So I just want to ask a couple questions on what you just said. So it's interesting that you said that at the top, there's some disagreements. Do you mind sharing just one or two? Because that sounds really interesting.
Oh my God, it's crazy. It's actually crazy. So let's go very, very top, right? Jan LeCun doesn't agree with the godfather of AI. And I think Yoshua Bengio is on there as well. But there's general disagreements about risk, AI risk. So Jan is basically stated, there's interviews, I've watched several on YouTube where he publicly disagrees with these colleagues of his because he very plainly puts it that we have the control to connect these models to actions. So saying that these are just going to get out of control and have all of this high risk is ridiculous. We have the control to be like, no, we're not going to connect that to an action. That is incredibly foolish. Why would we do that? And because of that very simple kind of thought process, he is of the camp of this is all being overhyped, and it's being overhyped for power gathering reasons, right? Like if you're making it sound like, oh, we have God knowing technology, we're all powerful, people are going to be afraid and also more, apt to give you money or invest in you or go to you as a resource. It's BS, right? Like, so yeah, there's so much of that right now. Unfortunately, there's so much hype and disillusion in the industry, as well as like a really terrifying segregation of concentrated power at the top. And that was so visible at NeurIPS, Danny. I can't even put into words like how frightening that was. So there are lots of incredible, more minority groups of researchers working on this technology. And there was a dedicated day, a dedicated space for these researchers to talk about their work, to express what it is that they're seeing and their concerns. And all of these sessions, they're called affinity sessions, are going on. They're tucked back away on the second floor in these tiny rooms. No one attended them. And it was at the same time these massive large language model talks were going on with some of like the leading researchers and leading labs. So what do you expect, right? I push that back on NeurIPS that you can't create space for these affinity groups and not dedicate actual like time and resources to, encouraging people to listen to them. So that was really, really hard to see. And I've talked to several organizers about it that have confirmed some of like these concerns. Yeah. So I really hope to like help make a push on that. I actually, fun fact, you could share this if you want with the audience. I was so heartbroken by the Indigenous in AI sessions. No one was there. And these speakers were so proud, regardless of, no one really being there, to just be there and be presenting at NeurIPS. And Black in AI, Muslim in AI, Latina. I mean, there are all these incredible groups of researchers that got no visibility. I mean, none. So I took a morning off and I just put together this story about just that lack of visibility. And these groups are talking about losing languages, losing identity of their culture. It is totally different than talking about how do we get more GPUs. It's just like, oh my God, like, are we focusing on the wrong things? What are we all doing? That was wild and very scary.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I don't think the average person doesn't realize what's going on.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And it's funny because coming from like the SEO world where I'm not saying we're perfect, but I think at the SEO world, digital marketing world has made large strides in inclusion and trying to make it a little bit more open to multiple ideas. So I can imagine like for you where you're in that world, but now also in this world of AI, it's like such a culture shock.
Such a culture shock, and also goes against everything we know scientifically. That's the other part where I'm like, to even take like general racism out of the conversation, the fact that it's been statistically proven that diverse data sets improve the performance of models. Diverse perspectives, at the table improve the performance of outcomes. How are we still having such segregated conversations about this technology? And it's a huge loss to the community because so many of these brilliant voices just aren't being heard.
So I was going to ask this question later, but I think it's a good question to ask now. With LLMs and the training material, and which are written by humans, and they inherently have human biases, do you believe there's any way to eventually filter out the human error and prejudices that we're seeing?
No, because there will always be bias, but there's ways to mitigate that bias. And one of those ways is by introducing transparency into what those biases are. So even like with our rough understanding of like the C4 data set, which is used in most LLM trainings, we understand that, Wikipedia is super biased. But now that we know the specifics of it, right? Because the average editor at Wikipedia is, I think, 27 years old. Over 87% are men. They are of higher education, single and no kids. Because we know that, we can better adjust. We can better kind of navigate some of those biases. It's when these closed black box systems give us no insight into what they were trained on. Even like the image generative models, we lack the understanding there of like what all went into it. If we knew, we could have a much stronger understanding of those biases and find ways to navigate them. With LLMs specifically, there is a really exciting area of research to help mitigate errors and some of the bias with multi-agent deployment. So with that, you're actually deploying basically multiple instances of LLMs, and the thought process being that the odds of them all making the same bias, judgment or error will be less likely. There's still a whole lot of work to be done in that space, but that's some really exciting progress. And then, oh my gosh, I wish I could remember her name. There was a brilliant talk at NeurIPS around identifying bias in image recognition models and generative image models. And it was some of the most brilliant research I've seen on the topic to date. So there is exciting work being done, but again, unfortunately, it's not like necessarily in companies' best interests, but it's an important area of research.
So apparently AI has a problem with giraffing, identifying giraffes where there aren't any, because its training material contains more giraffes than are truly present in the world. I don't know if you saw that article.
No.
Are there any other fun errors that you've encountered like that?
Oh, there's so many weird ones. Yeah, there's so like early on with Dolly, I was working at the AI company Hugging Face. We would play around with that all the time. And 9 times out of 10, if you didn't enter text and you just asked it to generate an image, it was obsessed with generating a woman in a sari almost every time. And I interviewed the developer of that first Dolly Mini, and he had no idea. He had a couple hypotheses around like, well, maybe there was just a large amount of women in saris in the training set that had no alt text or caption. And then obviously, Danny, I'm thinking of SEOs. I'm like, oh my God, what have we fed these things? What have we done? So yeah, there's all sorts of weird oddities like that.
Crazy.
They're foolish in ways we can't predict,
And as you're talking, I'm thinking, and that's the scary part, because we're going to have a generation of people, kids now, who look at this as if it's being absolute true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's the scary part, is how is that shaping like worldviews?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on to another kind of interesting topic, but OpenAI is currently in litigation for copyright infringement by the New York Times. What's your take on how this might turn out and the impact on the marketing world?
It could have huge implications. So I have heard that, there was a similar smaller lawsuit by a company. I'm blanking on what they were, but they were able to sue OpenAI for like the same copyright reasons. And now they get royalties every time like they believe that their text has been used. And so they've worked out some deal. I don't know they haven't been like, that's not fully transparent, but it's super interesting to consider that something like that could happen with the Times. But there's also the conversation of like, what is public domain? How does that work? You really start to get into like really, really sticky situations. But I don't think that some of OpenAI's like biggest legal arguments are going to hold water. I mean, the fact that they're like, one of their arguments is, it's really hard. Like you have to be pretty sophisticated prompt engineer to get it to generate verbatim New York Times articles. Like that's not how copyright works. Like I don't know that like the lawyers will care about that so I don't know. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think it will likely set a precedent. So it's something to definitely keep an eye on.
It makes me think that maybe it will turn into something like a Spotify, right? It's kind of like if that piece of text was touched in that. I mean, I don't know enough about LLMs to understand how that would work, but I mean, could it technically say, okay, these data sources were pinged and I got to pay? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if
the thing though is it doesn't even work like that.
It doesn't work that way, right?
No, it's in a multidimensional latent space. It has no track record of like the sources of information. It's just basically contextualize all the text in like a language representation space of information. So it's all mixed together, right? Like I don't know how they would even do that.
It's complex. I'm glad we're not the lawyers or the judges on that case.
Same.
All right, let's segue into more of a SEO feel. What do you believe makes content world class?
Differentiating yourself from the status quo. I think that's what makes you world class. What makes you world class is consuming all of the top ranked content on a particular topic that you want to target and really identifying themes, topics, trends, layouts, media types. How are all these competitors delivering that information and what's missing, right? Like not only what can you add, but how can you make it more succinct? How can you make it more value driven for the user? What does it look like that their intent is, right? Are there a bunch of videos on the search result pages for these topics? Should you integrate that? Are images helpful in conveying different complex things? So I think being really, really mindful of how to deliver maximum value, whether that be like educating or getting people information fast, and doing it in a way that sets yourself apart through that value add.
And do you feel like Google really sees that? Like you've done your research and like you really feel like you have something that's totally different and it deserves to be position one. In your experience, do you feel like more often than not, you can win with world-class content, or it just depends?
No, that's a good one. And I feel like I have a controversial answer, and I just don't care. I don't even care if Google sees that. It's really not about Google at that point. It's about maximizing your odds of being the most user-pleasing experience and having that sort of be the benchmark that Google will eventually see and likely reward. I think I focus a lot on that. And I also, over the last, I would say, 4 years or so, I have been putting way more emphasis on like kind of the old school stuff that Eric Ward used to talk about. He used to say, you need to be link building as if Google's going to disappear tomorrow. Where would your top visitors come from? And I love that. I think we should all always be thinking about that. So I, will be on like the most popular subreddits for weeks, if not months ahead of a launch, knowing what they're talking about, knowing what's getting, a bunch of interaction. And I will position different pieces of content into those communities in a way that's enticing. And there's opportunities to do that all over the web. And I think that can also jumpstart world-class content. So again, kind of bypassing Google, it was like Google's going to start to see some of that traction.
I think that's so powerful. We often say like you need to create content for the users, not for the bots, right?
Yeah, totally.
But it's hard to actually do that and to actually think that way. And that's why I think like things like UX and UI are so important. And I don't think everyone's there yet, right?
Yeah.
I love that perspective.
It naturally brings that technical search value innately, in the links and the resources. But yeah, I hear you.
So often it feels like the world is demanding quantity over quality as it pertains to content. How do you still satisfy consumers and algorithms with high quality content in lesser amounts?
This is just, speaking from my experience, my best kind of back pocket case studies that I have ready to go at any given moment to a potential client or a friend in a particular situation, or someone hoping to accomplish this thing, they all come from kind of rich, high time investment strategy. All of my like prized gems in the search space and in marketing have really that have stood the test of time are because I was able to really deep dive on a particular topic and deliver more qualitative content than quantitative every time. And it's interesting because I was recently talking to a bunch of DMOs, so destination marketers, who are pressured to do this like volume over quality. And I was able to give some like very real examples of these things wouldn't have stood the test of time if we took that approach. Granted, it doesn't work for everyone, but I still get calls from clients from over 8-9 years ago who I set up on this piece of content that has snowballed over time. Those evergreen pieces aren't going to be your low quality, high quantity work.
Yeah, I think the trick is for how do you sell that to clients? Because sometimes I know myself, we were up against another company recently on a proposal for a specific SEO, and from our perspective, it was more about quality. But
Yeah.
the other firm that we were up against was all about quantity, and and they wanted to go with that other firm because of the quantity aspect.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
It's so interesting. And maybe, I mean, some people can find a balance and do that well, but I sort of also think of it as like, busyness isn't a good metric of success, right? And like being really strategic in your efforts and also just like seeing so many efforts get such a high splash because of like the strategic nature of it. I think of the Yard that created the celebrity jet emission research that went completely viral. I mean, they had to their legal team was under fire because of it. They kind of stood their ground. It fit with their values, right? They're very environmentally conscious. They want to work with companies that care about the environment. And it ended up working really, really well in their favor. And now they have every backlink you could ever dream of, which is, again, just like a residual benefit. But I think of cases, and I think as marketers, we have gravely undervalued PR. There are so many ways we can be savvy with planting different stories in the press if we know what we're doing. And so that's also kind of been a tool I've enjoyed using a lot lately.
So we're going to segue into a topic which I don't know if you're ready for, but I know that you are a certified ASL interpreter. And back in the day, I believe you used to do it on the ski slopes where you were
Yes.
helping people out. So for those people who don't know what ASL is, that's American Sign Language. It was developed independently of spoken American English, and it's the primary sign language in the United States. It has its own grammar and syntax rules. People have different accents in the way they sign. There's also SEE, which is signed exact English, exactly what it sounds like. It's just word for word signs to match up with spoken English. And then naturally, you have your certified ASL interpreter, who's someone who has taken and passed the certification exam, which is not easy. So, Brittany, the question is, how did you get into this? And I think it's so wonderful and amazing.
Oh my gosh, that was such a great intro to this. That is amazing that you did all that research. I love it. Sign language is so fun. It's so beautiful. And I would argue you can be like more descriptive in what you're communicating because you can like play with how you're communicating it. I can keep it real with you, Danny. I had a crush on a boy when I was in, let's say like the 6th or 7th grade who was deaf. And so
Wow.
I convinced his mom to put me in sign language class with his brother, his younger brother, who I was of the same grade. So Jeff and I would take sign language class after school, and Jeff had no idea. I would just wanted to be able to talk to his brother. But it very quickly, through Jeff, I learned how fun it was. Like we would be able to, he would be in a classroom and I would be in the hallway and we could talk, right? We could talk through walls. We could I remember we had swim class together and we could talk underwater. And it was like, this is the most beautiful language ever. And I was obsessed. So I took it throughout college. Whenever I travel, I try to connect with different deaf communities. So there's a really beautiful community in Sydney, Australia, and they have a whole different language, just like even alphabet system that they use. And I love it. It's so fun.
So it was natural when a position opened up on the slopes.
That was another thing I kind of invented, to be honest. I needed a ski ticket. I needed a lift pass.
Tell me about that.
I needed a lift pass. And I didn't want to spend, $700 at the time. And so
Yeah.
I was like, do you have any ASL interpreters? Like, is that something that you need? And the organizer was like, actually, yeah, we could definitely use that. And then I volunteered for the Wounded Warrior project. That was really, really fun. I love doing that. The one thing I will say about interpreting on the mountain is your hands freeze because I'm usually wearing a dark jacket and dark gloves. And so I have to take my gloves off to be really specific in what I'm saying or whatever. And so by the time we would go inside, my hands would just be frozen solid. They had to have come up with better gloves now. But it's such a beautiful beautiful language, and it was a great experience.
So were you the ski instructor as well, or you would like just stand with the ski instructor and then just interpret what he was saying?
I was both. And I was both on a snowboard. So it was weird because I can ski, but when it's like those little hills like that, even though snowboards like kind of suck to be on when you're on like the bunny hills, I was just more comfortable on my board. And so it was like, I had to also negotiate that, but they let me keep my snowboard. And then I would usually get teamed up with a snowboarder, but sometimes there were skiers. And yeah, I would teach people how to snowboard and ski.
Wow. Brittany, you are a fascinating person, but like knowing all these things about you now, like just takes that fascination and multiplies it by like a million.
All sweet.
But it's so cool. But it all fits, right?
Yeah.
It all fits. Like the language and being that creating your own situations and opportunities and having these amazing opportunities. Man, this is a cool story. I love it. And it's only begun, right? We got a lot more to write.
Exactly. Thanks, Danny.
So cool. So to wrap up, we're going to do our top 3 because we were talking about skiing.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about your top 3 places that you like to ski or snowboard?
There's so many that I hold dear to my heart. I feel like most of them are out in Colorado. I think number 1 has to be Breckenridge, just because like having lived there, where all like the secret little huts are, and where like our friends would hide cases of beer and like snacks, and you just knew where to go in the woods. So those like little forts and tree houses are so fun. And there's a bunch of like kind of more secluded secret chairlifts that most visitors don't know how to get to. So like those little things were so fun. I also think A Basin Back Bowl is underrated. It's so much fun on a powder day. Vail Back Bowl, you can't beat it. And then they also like go, at your own risk, the Minturn Mile, where you go under the ropes, and it's a mile long into the town of Minturn behind Vail. But if you go with a group of people who know what they're doing, it's so fun. It's so beautiful. So yeah, those are probably my top 3.
This is going to be embarrassing, but I have to say it because you bring up Vail Back Bowl. So it was my first time skiing. I took a couple lessons at the Bunny Hills at Vail. So I basically have a whole bunch of brother-in-laws and their whole crew. They all knew how to ski, and I was like the newbie. So I took the lessons for one day, did pretty well, and they saw me like, Danny, you're ready to go. So they took me to the top, to the back bowls, and once you get down, it's cool, but when you first start, that incline is just hectic.
Yeah.
And literally, it was the worst experience of my life.
No.
So like I like go down a little bit, but I'm so scared, and like, no, it's easy, this and that. And I literally I skied down, like sitting on my skis, going down the back bowl. That's not a bad
option, yeah.
Oh my God. Eventually I think Ski Patrol saved me, but and I've skied many times since, but that was my introduction. And
that's a rough introduction, Danny. I
promise
it was
pretty rough.
It could be more fun. That's brutal.
But it's funny. It's funny to look back. So it's all good.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, wanted to know, what's your next big thing? What's the big plan for 2024?
The mission for 2024 is to basically get this information into the hands of marketers and SEOs in a way that is immediately valuable for them. I hear a lot of conversations about, marketers being put in the position to use AI by upper management that they themselves don't know what this technology is. So I have different resources in the pipeline just to help with those conversations, help navigate this changing landscape, and also how to take like more actionable steps to incorporating this into your workflows. There are a lot of incredible applications. Customer support comes to mind. There are some really great examples by OpenAI, and I'm excited to kind of repackage and like tailor things for marketers that can be really helpful.
So is it possible there might be a course coming down the line?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, you heard it first here, hopefully.
Yeah.
So where can listeners learn more about you and your business?
I've really been putting blood, sweat, and tears into the large language model guide on Data Sci 101. Parts 1 and 2 are up. 3 is drafted and almost ready to go. So that should be coming very soon. But I want that to be kind of a standalone resource for people to reference back and get more information. I also, as my dear friend Daisy Quaker always puts it, she's like, we as marketers, we bake these turkeys, right? We spend all of our time putting together these huge guides or resources, and we get these turkeys. You have to make turkey sandwiches, turn it into videos and I don't know, just different resource types, right? Like audio. Think of all the ways that people can consume content. So I want to be more mindful of doing some of that this next year and delivering it in a way that again, provides value and helps communicate this technology and make it accessible. That's the other thing. Even attending NeurIPS, there's a lot of gatekeeping behind this technology. It stands behind a lot of closed doors, but there is a ton of information available to make sense of some of the things that we're interacting with. So really want to kind of tackle some of that in 2024.
So cool. Well, Britney, thank you for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more Marketing Mentor magic. See you next time.